Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, Mark Shaw, has recently witnessed his latest book titled Give Us More Guns, How South Africa's Gangs Were Armed. The book details a study that closely follows the case of Colonel Christiaan Prinsloo, where this particular senior police officer and gun expert sold guns to gang lords from the year 2007 and how he was sentenced to 20 years in jail in 2016. And to tell us more about this offering, Mark Shaw joins us now via Zoom. Mark, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with why you felt the need to write this book, Mark Shaw, and the significance behind the book's title, Give Us More Guns.
Thanks. I wrote the book because for me this is a really important crime, very frankly, that a large number of guns were taken from the police armory. Many of those were police guns that had been recommissioned or decommissioned, returned to the armory. And so it just seemed to me as a crime that had spawned a range of other crimes, given how many people may have been killed by these guns, but also reflected on some failings within the police system and reflected on the particular individual Prinsloo that you mentioned in your opening. The title, Give Us More Guns, really comes from the facts, and as the story unfolds in the book, is that the particular intermediary in the case, the gangs or gang bosses on the Western Cape demanded more guns. So once they were clear where the guns were coming from, once guns had been sold to a set of gangs or an alliance, another alliance who felt that they were not getting access to firearms also approached and asked, give us more guns. Yeah. So the sense of the gangs themselves demanding this supply-demand arrangement that developed.
Let's talk about the research that you put into this book and the lengths that you went to in obtaining some of the facts and the information on this book.
Well, the general approach, as in much criminology or work that attempts to tell a story in what you might call the underworld, is to interview as many people as possible. In this case, I was very interested at looking from the bottom up. Of course, I tell the story of Prinsloo, but I also wanted to tell the story of what the guns did to the gangs themselves. And so did a range of interviews with people, as you can see in the book, who either received the guns or gang members, etc., who may not have known where the guns came from, but who were then involved in a range of gang conflicts. And I wanted to sketch out how important guns are for gangs and what it did to, if you like, the gang economy, the sort of guns, drugs, territorial control that the gangs had. And I really wanted to demonstrate that this was not a neutral crime, that if you feed a large number of firearms into a gang-style arena, the consequences are severe.
Sure. And you write that in 2007, there was a large consignment that arrived in the Cape Flats. Talk to us about this, and as well as the three sources where these guns can be traced back to.
So the guns in the armory, in the police armory, really consist of three categories at the time and to some degree still today. Firstly, guns decommissioned from the SAPS itself. So there were a particular gun called the Z88, a handgun that was used, made in the last days of apartheid, issued out to the police. It was decommissioned in 2000s, or a portion of those were decommissioned. So they were in the armory, and those guns they're a 9mm handguns, and they became very popular with gangs. Secondly, guns that come from evidence stores in different police stations, so the so-called SAPS 13 stores where evidence is kept or stored. If it's not used, it's then sent to the armory. And finally, guns that ordinary citizens handed in during periods of amnesties. And that formed the cluster of the firearms that were available. Those were sold on in different consignments and in different ways. And I trace the story of some of those consignments, guns packed into boxes or received on the back of a bakkie in a particular place in Cape Town. So it's a diverse array of guns, but as you may have read, the Z88 for me becomes a symbolic of a wider issue because it's a police gun, it's made in South Africa, it's liked by gangsters themselves. And so to me, that symbolized the nature of the story.
Yeah, in as much as it symbolizes the nature of the story, you also describe this period as the deadliest single crime in post-apartheid South Africa. Tell us more about why this is the case.
And I don't say that lightly. Thanks for the question. Ballistics presented in the court in Cape Town shows that at least 1,000 deaths are related to the selling on of these firearms, and an equivalent number of attempted murders. So I don't know a single crime that has led to that number of or that volume of violence. Hence the conclusion that I drew. Of course, you can respond and say, well, these are indirectly, it's not Prinsloo, so to speak, who pulled the trigger. But in a sense, this is a very callous crime to the degree that this enormous consignment of guns went into an environment where he knew they would be used or should have known.
Okay.
And hence making that statement in the book.
Okay. Now, speak to us about the recommendations that you propose in the book as to how this problem of circulation of illegal firearms can be tackled.
The book makes several recommendations at the end. So it tells a story and then it ends with some ideas, as you've outlined, about what can be done. I think the first is to audit how many guns have been lost in this process. That remains unclear. And of course, as you may have read, I spoke to different people and I think the numbers are higher than what Prinsloo admitted to, the numbers that he sold on. Secondly, it's worth still doing an audit because guns are still leaking from the armory. There was a case reported a few weeks ago of a gun that had been registered as being handed in an amnesty, and it was back on the street in Hanover Park. Sure. There's a case against a gun dealer in KwaZulu-Natal selling guns onto a particular gang in the Western Cape. So there's some evidence that something is still wrong, and so the importance of having a look there is urgent, I would argue. Secondly, the book covers a lot of the problems around the Central Firearms Registry. And I make the suggestion that, in fact, that should be an independent body or independent of the police. That while there has been an enormous amount over the years of criticism against the Central Firearms Registry, there still hasn't been an effective response to the processes of licensing and what have you. Okay. And the book tells a story around corruption at the Central Firearms Registry, etc.
All right, Mark Shaw, great chatting to you. And perhaps one interesting point that is raised in this book is that, there's a similar way in which gangs operate all over the world. Thank you so much for putting that into perspective.
Thank you.